Okay, crafties, this is Jennifer with Crafted Evidence on YouTube and on TikTok. Please go to YouTube and subscribe. I'm trying to reach my 500 subscriber goal. Anyway, we are moving into chapter 23 of Letters to Christopher by Sherilyn Cadle. This is the hardest chapter that I'm going to cover. If you do not do well with death and details about things like that, I suggest you skip this video and move on to a different one. I'm going to take a look at my notes really quick just to make sure that I'm covering everything here. They do talk in this chapter about how careful they had to be with these bodies, because, especially the girls, because they were coated in oil. They, at this moment, when they're recovering the bodies, think that they're possibly going to have to go to trial. And they have to preserve all evidence possible to put Chris Watts behind bars. At this time, we do not know he is going to plead guilty. First, we are going to begin with Shanann.
The police identified the freshly moved dirt and went about extracting Shanann's body from the clandestine grave. During the extraction, the agents bagged Shanann's hands and also placed a clean sheet at the bottom of the cadaver bag in an attempt to preserve any evidence that may have been present but not visible at that time. They removed her body from the scene around midnight. Shanann's body was so decomposed, they could not identify her by the pictures they had. But because of Christopher telling authorities where he buried her, they felt sure it was her. After the grid search was completed, an agent was assisted with additional digging around Shanann's gravesite, using shovels, in an attempt to locate Bella and Celeste's blankets and stuffed animals. No blankets or stuffed animals were located. A short time later, Weld County deputy and forensic pathologist arrived on the scene to assist with the recovery effort. The CBI contacted an agent from the Colorado State Hazardous Materials Section with an ongoing investigation. On August 16, 2018, at 5 a.m., an agent from the CBI sent a text message to agents with the Colorado State Patrol Hazardous Materials Section, CS Hazmat, advising them to contact him in reference to a CBI request. At 5:04 a.m., the trooper texted back and advised that he would be en route to Rogan, Colorado. At 5:30 a.m., the CBI agent had a phone conversation with the trooper of the hazmat team to assist in recovering the deceased victims from crude oil tanks in southeast Weld County. This stemmed from a case that Frederick police were investigating, where 3 members of a family were missing in their jurisdiction. Investigators had reason to believe that 2 of the missing persons were deceased and dumped into 2 400-barrel crude oil tanks on an Anadarko patrol.
Recovering Shanann. This chapter is about bringing the girls home.
The police identified the freshly moved dirt and went about extracting Shanann's body from the clandestine grave. During the extraction, the agents bagged Shanann's hands and also placed a clean sheet at the bottom of the cadaver bag in an attempt to preserve any evidence that may have been present but not visible at that time. They removed her body from the scene around midnight. Shanann's body was so decomposed, they could not identify her by the pictures they had. But because of Christopher telling authorities where he buried her. At 5:30 a.m., the CBI agent had a phone conversation with the trooper of the hazmat team to assist in recovering the deceased victims from crude oil tanks in southeast Weld County. This stemmed from a case that Frederick police were investigating, where 3 members of a family were missing in their jurisdiction. Investigators had reason to believe that 2 of the missing persons were deceased and dumped into 2 400-barrel crude oil tanks on an Anadarko petroleum drill site.
So as we know, Chris refused to go out to the scene and show detectives where the bodies were located. Instead, they brought him a drone photo and he just marked an S where Shanann was, B in C on the oil tanks. We are going to move on to the part about Cece being recovered. She was the first child to be recovered. My theory on why they could not find the stuffed animals and blankets, I think that in a panic, Chris took them with him and he disposed of them when he threw his clothing away, because he packed himself an extra pair of clothing that morning and changed into it. So now we're going to move on to Cece's rescue
of a small female child. They waited for the East Tank battery to be offloaded into tanker trucks, which took approximately 6 hours due to the oil being methodically drained into a metal pan and then pumped into the tanker trucks through a filter. After almost all of the crude oil was removed from the tank, the rear manway cover of the tank was removed. Members of the CSP Hazmat entered the East Tank and recovered a deceased female child, later identified as Celeste Watts. Celeste was covered in oil and was wearing a pink nightgown, and it could be seen she was also wearing a pull-up. Once outside the tank, there was a doctor who patted her stomach area down with oil-absorbent pads. Celeste appeared to have skin slippage and was wrapped in a white sheet and then laid inside of an open body bag. After Celeste had been recovered, the CBI agent left the scene. The trooper tried to take a hold of her upper right arm and turn her over. He took a hold of her right arm as the agent lifted her by the left arm, and they moved toward the manway. The trooper grasped the left wrist and shoulder area as the agent did the same thing on the right side. As the victim passed through the manway, her left hand was degloved. The trooper and the agent continued to support her body as she was placed into a containment pool. The agent retrieved the removed skin that was from the left hand and gave it to one of the gloved Frederick police officers. The agent and the trooper then moved up the dirt berm and put it on a table. They both walked around in approximately 4 inches of crude sludge and looked for anything else in the tank that may be evidence. They did not see anything in the sludge.
I play this because I want people to understand how traumatizing it was. If it's so hard for us to hear it, imagine the people who lived through this. Imagine the Rusick family sitting at home, getting text messages, getting calls. It took 6 hours just to retrieve Cece from one of the oil wells. I want people to understand how traumatic this scene was and this whole case was for everyone involved. There are people out there who feel that Chris didn't get a fair trial because he pleaded guilty. I hope that when you hear this, part of Sherilyn Cadle's book, which is all in the discovery, you might change your mind. Because he really not just took his family's lives, he traumatized several people who worked on this case. We're going to move on to Bella's recovery.
The levels were measuring about the same as the first tank. The trooper and the agent went on air at 7:53 p.m. and made entry into the tank at 7:54 p.m. The agent went in first with the trooper close behind. The agent walked over and could see a small child's body face up. I grabbed her right arm near the wrist area and moved her toward the manway. At this point, the trooper was able to secure her left arm and left leg. He and the agent then passed through the manway. The trooper grasped the left wrist and shoulder area, as the agent did the same on the right side. As the victim was passed through the manway, the trooper and the agent continued to support her body as she was placed into a containment pool. During this extraction, there was some skin slippage where they had to touch the victim's body. There was also some skin on the plywood where her back made contact. The trooper and agent walked around the inside of the tank. They exited the tank and walked over to the field south of the tanks. The body was turned over to the Weld County coroner. The trooper continued to monitor the second victim, using a 4-gas monitor, as the Weld County coroner and pathologist attempted to remove the crude oil, utilizing several oil-absorbent pads. The second victim was then placed into a body bag and taken to the Weld County coroner's vehicle. Both bodies were decomposing and covered with crude oil. Wiggins Fire again decontaminated the two with hose spray and firefighting foam. They went off air at 7:56 p.m.
The details of those recoveries are truly horrifying, and I hope that people take a minute to think about the first responders and the families who went through this. Thank God there are people who are willing to help and do this type of work. If you did not know, the Rusiks had to bury the children in a special type of coffin because they couldn't get the oil completely off of their bodies. So they could not be cremated because there could have been an explosion.